Welcome to Agency Office Hours for June 2022. I'm Karl Sakas, agency consultant, coach, and trainer, helping you make smarter decisions to help you grow your agency more smoothly. We're here every month answering your questions live about how to grow your agency, yes, more smoothly. Here's a preview of the questions we'll be discussing today. First up, Brandon in Colorado has a question about pricing. Specifically, how do you ensure that you are not underpricing your work? Then, Michelle in New Jersey has a question about internal promotions. How do you know whether to promote from within versus hire externally? Then I'll be sharing some of my advice about recession prep. Right now, here in mid-June, we don't know if we're heading into recession or not, but it is a strong possibility. I'll share my latest advice on what to do now and in the days, weeks, and months to come. Then Stephanie in Tennessee has a question about team self-sufficiency. Specifically, what can you do to make your team more independent faster? And I'll be bringing in my colleague, Kate, to share about some of her experience, including her experience reading my mind within the first week of her being on board at Sakas & Company. And finally, Adrian in Arizona has a question related to client delegation around whether people outside the account manager should talk to clients. The answer might surprise you. If you've submitted a question, but I haven't mentioned your name here, feel free to resubmit your question for the future. We regularly take questions that didn't make it for a previous episode, so please do consider resubmitting. As a reminder, don't share anything out loud since we're recording out loud that you don't want to potentially become public. And if you're watching live, you'll get the recording within 24 hours. And if you're watching the recording, well, you've got it already now. All right, well, Brandon, you are up first. If you could unmute yourself.
Sure.
Awesome, great. So I can hear you just fine. Thank you for joining today. To paraphrase, your question was this: how do we ensure that we are not underpricing our work? If you could, please elaborate a bit more on your question and we'll answer it.
Great. Well, Karl, Kate, thanks for having me. Thanks for accepting my question. So I run a custom software development agency. We're US-based, about 15 people. We specialize in working with startups, small businesses, and non-technical founders and help launch their projects into market. And our sales process, we do primarily custom work. And so we're helping, understand the client's need, project, idea, whatever it is. A lot of it is I have an idea type people.
Yep.
And we come up with a solution. And in a discovery process, so we sell a low-cost discovery process. It takes about a month long. We work with them, we flush out their idea, do research. And then at the end of it, we try and stamp a price on a few different options and kind of educate them on pros and cons of each option and hopefully equip them with enough information to make the best decision for themselves as a business owner.
Got it.
The problem is when we get past strategy, we get acceptance of the path we're taking from the client in the discovery process. That is our trigger to move into this estimation, level of effort, understanding, where I go and talk to my team members, the technical people on the team, and ask them to assess this project from an hourly standpoint. And then I have a janky pricing calculator that I've been trying to piece together that tries to assume risks and, is this somebody that I have to consider commission for because it was a referral, and I have to bake all this in and hope I didn't forget anything.
Yeah.
And then so that's kind of the elaboration. I guess I'll stop there. And I want to speed that up, I guess, because this takes a lot. It could take 2 weeks. Could have somebody out of office. I can't get an estimation. Things get delayed. I believe there's a faster way to do it, but I'm not sure. And so we've been kind of looking for an answer there. I hope that makes sense.
So ultimately, the question is, when you have a custom process, doing custom work for clients, and you're doing paid discovery, and then ultimately quoting a more robust phase 2 or phase 1, depending on how you count it after discovery, how do you make sure you're pricing it right? And in particular, how do you make sure you're not underpricing it? Well, there are a few things to consider. One, the fact that you're doing paid discovery up front does help dramatically. There are many agencies that try to price a complex engagement, whether it's a project or a retainer or both, without doing any kind of paid discovery process. The problem is you're trying to come up with a number without knowing if the client's even going to move forward or pay you anything. And so, that leads to trying to do things quickly because it may not even work out. So the fact that you've already added paid discovery is really helpful. And if you're joining live, my colleague Kate has shared my articles on paid discovery. This is for anyone listening who doesn't do that already. And certainly, Brandon, worth taking a look at those 2 articles to see if there's anything you want to tweak about your process.
Thanks.
Now, you mentioned the pricing calculator and that it's kind of janky. You are not alone. You have said it out loud, but my guess is a number of the people listening or watching the video also have a somewhat, creaky pricing calculator. You're not alone. And part of the challenge is that even when you have a calculator, there are certain things that you can't easily program into the calculator. And that's where your sense of judgment comes in. So say the pricing calculator spits out a number of $100,000. You have to decide, based on the client's level of sophistication and their overall goals and how many stakeholders involved, does that seem right? Or do you need to dial it up because, say, there's going to be more account management involved, more project management involved? So there is always going to be a judgment call. And part of what we do is part of that judgment call identifying is, how much to round up. That also includes when you're getting custom inputs from your subject matter experts, depending on the work. It could be designers, developers, writers, analysts, so on. That includes knowing who tends to be more versus less accurate. For instance, I had a developer who was, as many developers are, very optimistic about how fast he could get things done. And so I knew that anytime I got an estimate from him, I needed to double it. On the other hand, I also had a designer, this is when I was PM at one of the agencies, who tended to be very precise and was pretty accurate. So in her case, I would add maybe 10% just in case, but hers was pretty much right on, rather than having to say double it. So that, that's worth considering. You also want to have your library of estimates. What are some things that you've done before and how have those gone, as you're basically building a Lego set for the engagement. Now, you can also consider pricing model. For instance, if you're doing things on, say, a sprint basis, you're not promising a specific deliverable at the end. You're just saying you're going to plan a certain number of sprints. They're going to get the best possible outcome by the end, and you'll be able to adjust along the way, but you're not promising a specific deliverable. Sometimes people get stuck or get in trouble when they work on an agile basis where they've got sprints, the number of sprints and the price per sprint is fixed. The deliverable should not. Don't promise a deliverable if you're working on a flexible budget situation. On the other hand, if you are promising a fixed scope for a fixed price, you do need to do more work up front. One solution to that, if it's a challenge to predict out everything that's going to happen, is break the project into multiple phases. So say it's paid discovery, maybe you do some initial work around overall strategy, architecture, maybe design. Once they confirm on that, then you scope out the development. Mm-hmm. And you can give them some ranges. But Brandon, what's your reaction to this so far?
Yeah, and a lot of it is it's not, news. We've thought about a lot of those things. My concern, I appreciate it all, by the way, and it's validating to hear you say that, because it's a lot of things we've been thinking about.
There are plenty of people who aren't doing that. So yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And the one thing I'm thinking of is, scaling a service-based business is hard in its own.
Yeah.
But scaling a service-based business that customizes the thing that they do every single time makes the amount, it increases the surface area of things that you can't touch from with an automation and system standpoint. Yes. And one of those custom things inside the custom thing we do is pricing. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I speed that up? And how do I reduce risk while speeding it up?
One option, of course, is just to add more to every price. For instance, I was working with a new client that does primarily content marketing for a particular industry. And we were talking about, one of the initial goals was raising what he's charging on a monthly basis, both the average and the minimum. And we have done that. But we had an early call, I think before our official kickoff, and he reached out and he said, I'm trying to figure some things out about pricing. And I think at the time he was charging $5,000 a month as a minimum. I said, I think for what you described about your expertise, you should charge more. And he's like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. How much? And I said, well, when are you next quoting a price? And he said, because there are a lot of factors involved. And he's like, I've got a sales call in 45 minutes. I said, okay, next time we're going to do a way more involved process, but this time just tell them it starts at $6,000. Like raise the price $1,000 a month, and we'll figure out the more detailed version later. I checked in with him after a sales call. The client said yes. Now, since then, we've raised it more towards 7,000 and 8,000, depending on the client. Some are a lot more. But I mean, that's the simplest risk management, just raise the price. Now, if you find that you're regularly losing deals, that approach, that's the risk of that approach. Ideally, you're closing 50 to 70% of the proposals you send out. If you're regularly closing in that range, you're probably pricing right. On the other hand, if you're closing 90%, you're probably underpricing. On the other hand, if you're only closing, 10%, you're either overpricing, or you also could be over proposing. You're proposing to people that were never going to say yes in the first place. So consider that range 50 to 70%, and then adjust the pricing accordingly. To your comment, you're right. It is harder to scale a fully custom agency because someone has to be making these scoping decisions. Mm-hmm. And scaling really is hiring an architect or hiring a strategist or someone who has your skill set to do that work, but who is not you.
Yeah. Thanks. And I have one other follow-up question is of factoring in pricing. There's costs that go into delivering the project. There's the delivery costs, the cost of the personnel, the tools you use. There's overhead, which is nothing. It's not project specific, but it's
you do need to cover it. Yes.
Right. And then there's how much profit do we want to make? And I'm curious, do you have any rules of thumb that you like telling your clients to try and follow, or got, North Stars for those kind of figures?
Mm-hmm. So it varies dramatically by agency, but if we're looking at gross profit margin for a project, I have clients who are targeting anywhere from 40 to 60% gross margin. But some of that depends on the agency model. For instance, are you doing the work in-house, or are you outsourcing, or this or that? But the other thing to consider is ideally your net profit margins, and this is true for everyone listening, ideally your net profit margins are 20 to 30%. That is after paying everyone, including yourself, and covering overhead. Ideally, you're getting 20 to 30% net margins. If you're below that, you've probably got some profit leaks. And we'll be sharing my article coming up about dealing with profit leaks in a later segment. So it has some resources there too.
Great.
All right.
Yeah, that's been just a big focus of ours, is trying to figure out, we've gotten to where we are today. We're growing, and I'm looking at the past years and kind of looking at our P&L, and we're just not as profitable as I want to be. And I think it's because I'm not pricing correctly. I think that's one of the reasons. And I also don't understand necessarily fully how we actually make money. And that's been a big focus of mine.
Got it.
So yeah, anyway, appreciate your comments.
Absolutely. Well, good luck as you work through things. Take a look at the resources and let me know how it goes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Brandon. Next up is Michelle in New Jersey. Michelle, if you want to unmute yourself, welcome to Sakas & Company Agency Office Hours.
Thank you. Thanks for choosing my question.
Absolutely. So to paraphrase, you asked about internal promotions. Specifically, how do you know when to promote from within versus to hire externally? If you could elaborate a bit on your question and we'll dig in on the answer.
Sure. So I operate Drop and Hook. We're a social media and content marketing agency, and then we specialize specifically in transportation and logistics clients. So it's a niche within a niche, and chances are we're probably underpricing ourselves as well. So that always helpful stuff, but it's a bit of a price sensitive market, and I'm sure that will continue given the current economic signals that are happening. But as of right now, we've been growing over time, and I have been doing my best to get a little bit more out of the day-to-day of the business. And I have a great team that I feel like I really am at a point that I trust them to start doing stuff. And I'm trying to get them to, step out of the nest and fly a little bit more on their own, while I still am there as kind of a key strategist role and, helping with the client relationship where it needs to be. But we're kind of at the place where I would not particularly want to have to hire someone else right now, because that would put us in a bit of a scramble to really have to bring in some more new business pretty quickly. And I feel like in order for me to step out of more of the day-to-day, somebody has to own a little bit more of that account management and relationship management aspects. So I'm at the point of do I grow my individual contributors and push them a little bit more outside of their comfort zone into owning more of that? Which I think is the path my own career took, or do I let them keep kind of shining, doing what they're really good at, and I know they can do, and try to figure out a way to hire somebody else to take some more of the account management off of my own plate so I can then go out and go after the new business.
So we've got a few options here. So to paraphrase, the question is, if you want to get yourself out of the day-to-day as the agency owner, should you be passing day-to-day client relationships to your team, promotion from within, or do you need to hire externally to get someone to handle things? So the answer, as with many things, is it depends. One thing to consider would be to split the client strategist role from the day-to-day account management role. And this is something that a lot of my clients do, where the owner continues as the client strategist, but they are not the day-to-day person on the account. Someone else is the client's day-to-day contact. You get pulled in when it's the initial strategy or at certain milestone points along the way, but you are not anymore the first person the client goes to. So with that in mind, considering your existing team where they're primarily subject matter experts, I wouldn't recommend making someone also an account manager if they don't want to be client facing. So I would start by looking at, is there anyone on your team who wants to work with clients and who is or who would be good with clients, and then also having the bandwidth? And I have a model for that, and my colleague Kate will share the article. It's around the concept of desire, competence, and capacity. If something isn't getting done, usually it's because someone is missing one, two, or all three of those things. Desire, they want to do it. Competence, they know how to do it. And capacity, they have time in their day to do it. So I would take a look at your team now and see, does someone have a desire to do it and either competence or future competence to do it? Then you can shift things around capacity-wise. That's a starting place to look. If you see that there is no one on the team who could do that, then maybe you may have to hire externally. The ideal, though, would be to work with the team you have, at least as an initial point. Maybe it's not forever before you move forward on that. Michelle, what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, so they are all already client facing in that they're like coming with me to client meetings. The client knows them. And that's part of the reason that I'd love to just have them start owning more of the relationship, because the client's already comfortable with and trusts them. And it's more about, I think, pushing the team to feel ownership over like managing the flow of projects and staying on top of their own deadlines. So I'm not having to like do that admin aspect.
That raises, you brought up one of the other 6 agency roles, and if people are joining live, share that on chat. The 6 agency roles are account management, project management, SME, subject matter experts, client strategy, biz dev, and support. And so you've also raised the topic of project management. You know, AM is keep the clients happy, sell them more work. PM is get the work done smoothly and efficiently. Your SMEs are doing their craft all day long. Client strategist is focused on, based on the client's budget, how do you maximize the return on investment, the ROI, from that budget? So if you were to say continuous client strategist, someone needs to be the day-to-day client person, the account manager, but it sounds like you also need someone wearing the project manager hat as well.
Yeah.
So one solution might be, say you've got several SMEs, maybe one is really detail-oriented and enjoys coordinating things. Maybe you shift their role so that they're spending a third of their time, half their time on project management for themselves and others. And then you also have someone else who maybe isn't as detail oriented, but they're very personable. People like them, this and that. Maybe they are part subject matter expert, part account manager. They're the day-to-day contact for the clients. And then you get pulled in as strategist. Now, there are pros and cons to this approach. The main pro is there are people you already know and trust on your team. The main con is it's hard to wear 2 hats at once. Kind of like my first job after college at a social impact mutual fund, I was split between the marketing department and the sales department. It was like sort of client service and sales, but primarily my boss's job was to, to sell. And it was supposed to be 40% marketing, 60% sales. In reality, it was 40% marketing and 100% sales. And the sales boss kind of won out and eventually got me full time. So, it's challenging to juggle both. My recommendation, and we won't be able to sort out the exact details today, but my suggested follow-up for you, and this is true for anyone who's listening, if you're in this situation, take a look at your existing team. Do they have the desire, competence, and future capacity if you potentially bring in another SME or you get freelance help on their subject matter expert work? Do you have desire, competence, or future competence in future capacity to shift things? If the answer is no, then you probably will need to hire externally. But ideally, if you can build up with the team you have, things can go a lot more smoothly.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very small right now, so we're all wearing a lot of hats. And yeah, I think probably sooner rather than later, it is going to come to hiring someone, but it's figuring out who that person's going to be. So thank you.
Well, check out the articles, and they give you some ideas. And Kate, if you could also share our article on people wearing multiple hats when people need to serve in 2 or 3 roles at once. Michelle, that may be helpful as you decide how to split things.
Great, thank you.
All right, you're welcome, and thank you for joining. So coming up, we'll be looking at a question about team self-sufficiency, question from Stephanie in Tennessee, specifically how to get your team to be as autonomous and independent as quickly as possible. And the final question today is from Adrian in Arizona about client delegation. Specifically, should the account manager be the only person who talks to clients? The answer might surprise you. But before that, we have a word from our sponsor, Sakas & Company. The agency office hours is sponsored by Sakas & Company, helping you grow your agency more smoothly making smarter decisions for smoother growth through one-on-one support, executive coaching, and team training. So a lot of my clients have been asking about, is there going to be a recession? And or if so, what should we do? I'm not an economist, so I don't know if there's going to be a recession, or, I mean, I guess the economists don't know for sure. They can make some projections. I would say, regardless of what is going to happen, I strongly recommend taking steps now to prepare in case the worst happens. Now, what can you do? I've written an article about recession prep that I'd written several years ago and recently updated. If you get my newsletter, you received that last week, and Kate will share that in chat so you have that available. But I want to go beyond the tips in that article, since some of those things don't work as well if you have limited runway. You know, for instance, building your cash reserves. If you haven't built your cash reserves and recession happens, you probably won't have time to do that. Likewise, on reducing client concentration issues. There are some things you can do, for instance, creating a worst case financial plan. What would be the tier 1, 2, and 3 cuts that you might need to make, and things like that. But I'd like to look at things from a dealing with potential recession from a different perspective today. And there are 3 things to keep in mind. When it comes to dealing with recession, whether it's preparing or if it's actually happening, right now in mid-June 2022, it's a what if or when rather than it's happening now. But recession prep, 3 things. 1, consider what can you control? What are the things that you do have control over versus the things that you don't? Ideally, and this can be sometimes easier said than done, focus on the things that you do have control over. You don't have control over the overall state of the world. You don't have control over your local, national, global economy. You don't have control over gas prices and things like that. But you do have control over what you do within your agency. You have control over whether you're hiring or not, whether you do a layoff or not, or things like that. You have control over that. And by the way, if you're joining us live, please share in chat, what are you doing from a recession preparation standpoint? Please share in chat. So, think about what do you have control over and what don't you have control over, and ideally focus on the things that you can control. That also includes what you say to your team. It's okay to acknowledge that you don't have all the answers, that you don't know what is going to happen. Overall, I believe it's better to be vulnerable and admit you don't know rather than pretend like you do know. Your team is smart. They're going to see through it if you, say things that you obviously don't know or couldn't possibly know. So that's point number 1. Consider what can you control versus what you can't, and focus on what you can. And if you're not currently in therapy, working with a therapist or other advisor can be helpful in, processing and accepting the things that you can't control, because that's not fun, even if you know you don't have control over certain things. Second point is, as you make decisions in the coming days, weeks, months, I would encourage you to stay true to your values, goals, and resources, your VGR. That is, values and how you choose to operate, goals on where you're going, and you may make some adjustments to your goals along the way, and then resources, thinking about your overall resources, people on the team, cash in the bank, software, relationships you have, things like that. So be true to your values, goals, and resources, or you can look at it another way, consider your mission, vision, and values. Here's something that happened with one of my clients as the pandemic was starting in 2020. As was true for most agencies, there was an initial slowdown in pipeline. Things went, slow, and then suddenly a lot of clients were like, we're not ready to do anything. And in that moment, with this particular client, one of his questions for me in our coaching was, should I do layoffs? And we talked through it. And one of his conclusions from a values perspective was that he was willing to take a hit financially for 2 to 3 months in order to keep his team together. He chose to make a sacrifice because that was in line with his values and his agency's values. Good news, within a couple months, things started turning around in his particular niche. The pipeline started picking up again, and he didn't do the layoff. Yet, later that summer, one of his best employees resigned. And in our next coaching call, he was not happy about that. He was like, I made sacrifices, I was trying to keep everyone, and the employee left anyway. That's not great, but we talked through it, and one of the key things was he had followed his values. So if you aren't clear on your values as a leader, now would be a good time to review it while you still have some runway before it might turn into a crisis situation. And third point, think about what you can control versus not and deal with it accordingly. Second, act in line with your values, goals, and resources, and or your mission, vision, and values. Third point is take concrete steps. Whatever you do, do something. Doing nothing is not a good solution. Things are changing, things are happening. You need to do something. Now, how can you organize the something you do? One thing to consider, and I've been through this with several clients recently, is to consider 2 pieces: inspiration and a concrete plan. Inspiration is what could you do to inspire your team about your overall mission, vision, and values. After all, everyone is uncertain and maybe even more uncertain about what's going to happen. But if you point people to, here's what we're trying to accomplish, here's what we're trying to create, and I need your help, are you with me? The work that you do on the inspiration side will help keep the team motivated to a point. But then you also need a concrete plan. You need both of these. The concrete plan is, what are you going to do? For instance, we're seeing, sharing in chat, for instance, Ian, thank you for the note. You're more actively prospecting to ensure your sales pipeline is more than full. And that makes a lot of sense. For anyone listening, whether live or on the recording, if you're in charge of marketing and sales, or you have team members who are in charge of it, now is the time to ramp things up. If you've been a little lackadaisical about it, it needs some attention. But I mentioned that concrete plan, right? So inspiration plus concrete plan. One thing to consider is something that I did as I led a marketing association. We're dealing with some challenges. I took our overall goal and I broke that goal into different sub-projects. And my goal was to give everyone on my leadership team a job to do. This translated into something like 17 different sub-projects. Certain things for the membership team, certain things for the communications team, certain things for the programming team, certain things for community relations team, for the sponsorship team, and so on. Give everyone a job and make it clear how their contributions will help you move into the future. If you have any other things you're doing to share, to deal with recession preparation, please share in chat, so that everyone who's joining live can benefit. Because we're all, in a sense, as business leaders, we're in this together, even as we have our own challenges along the way. Patrick, thanks for the note. Diversifying into recession-proof industries, based on that. All right, well, next up, Q&A wise, we have a question from Stephanie in Tennessee. Stephanie, if you want to unmute yourself and come on in. Thank you for joining Sakas & Company's Agency Office Hours today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So to paraphrase, your question was about team self-sufficiency. Specifically, how do we train new team members to be more autonomous, more independent as quickly as possible? If you could, please elaborate a bit on your question and let's answer it.
Yeah, so we have a small agency in Tennessee. There's 7 of us. And we are between Memphis and Nashville, and we specialize in music tourism marketing. So we definitely work with other clients, but we about a year ago found our niche. So we help cities with their music scenes identity. We create ambassador programs, and luckily we've done a lot of video work, helped music museums, things like that. So love what we do. But we are in a smaller area. So a lot of our talent is right out of college and they've not worked in an agency before. They're very smart, very talented, but there's a lot to learn. And there's so many moving parts because we're specializing in an industry, not necessarily in a specific task or deliverable. So finding ways to make sure the quality meets expectations and giving guidelines so that they can do their very best work. And I'm not using the whole day doing meetings. I love doing it, but I end up working on the weekends or staying here till 6 or 7, but getting to do the other things. So I'm sure there's some things I could be doing differently to make that a better process. So that's what I want to know.
All right. Well, thank you for asking. So to paraphrase, how do you up-level your team faster so that people can be more independent, more autonomous, especially if you have a lot of recent graduates who have a lot of potential, are smart and motivated, but don't necessarily have a lot of experience.
Right.
So a few things to consider. One, someone needs to be coaching, mentoring, training, and so on, the new team members. For a larger agency, that would include having, in addition to department directors, you'd ideally have people in team lead roles. So like lead developer, lead XYZ strategist, that kind of thing, lead designer, where part of their job is to do the work, but part of their job is also to be coaching people. So that it's not all falling to the department director. Now, based on your current headcount, you are likely going to be that person in part, and it easily could take up 10 hours a week of your time. But if that's 10 hours a week is ultimately helping everyone become more billable or, more billable faster, or perhaps going from junior to regular or regular to senior, and you're raising the rates along the way, that could be a really good 10 hours a week.
Okay.
But that still takes up a lot of time. So now what? A few things to consider. One is, and we'll share some links to this in chat for people who are joining live, is to have a new hire ramp up plan for everyone on the team. And Kate, if you don't mind joining, or add you pinning here. So Kate, when you joined Sakas and Company last year, one of the things I did was create a new hire ramp up plan for you. What you're going to be doing in week 1, month 2, 3, 6, 12. I had a placeholder for month 24, which was basically like, we'll figure that out when we get there, kind of thing. What was it like for you to have that new hire ramp up plan?
It was great. I mean, so the whole process started even before I got hired. Karl has a very thorough vetting process. I did interviews, I did a paid assessment. So he knew my work before he hired me. And then the new hire ramp up plan, not only did it have expectations for the first 12 months, it also included links to various trainings to help me up level as a professional. It showed what his expectations were for me as a new member coming on board. And so I could see what he needed from me and anticipate his needs before he had to tell me about them.
Yes. And a good reminder about pointing to the different trainings. I spent probably, this was a new role, between 10 and 20 hours prior to Kate, you're starting, organizing all those different pieces. And sometimes realizing, oh, we don't have a training for that. We've just been, kind of doing it. It helped that Kate's predecessor had documented a lot. So I was able to point to where that was, things like that. And so, Stephanie, how do you approach things like a new hire ramp up today?
Okay.
Or to what extent do you do something like that?
So currently, I have a Google Doc with several things on a to-do list that I go through, and we have learning paths that I have people develop when they get here to where they say, hey, we need you to be the very best you can be at this role. And I designate paid time for everyone to learn on the job.
Excellent.
For that. So that's been good for those hard skills, just developing those further. But it sounds like a lot of this is just time that I'm going to need to invest and be very intentional with creating, like whether it's process documents or things that'll I've just got to put the hustle muscle in on it, and that's fine. But that does give me a lot of things I think about.
And something to keep in mind as you're doing that, the good news is when you make that investment in building out the training, that will work for the next hire or the current hire, but it'll work for their successor as well. For instance, I had hired someone who didn't work out, who wasn't a match, but good news, the recorded trainings that I did and another team member did, Kate was able to use as well. So that investment. So, and this is true, by the way, for everyone who's listening. You're like, it's going to take longer to come up with the documentation than just to do it myself.
Yeah,
that is absolutely true the first time. But say it takes you twice as long to train once and record it, you'll never have to do it again, or other than a little bit
you're right.
The other thing, the other thing to consider, and by the way, for everyone who's on live, if you could share in chat, what do you do to onboard new team members? Like if you could share that in chat. One of the other things to consider, Stephanie, and by the way, at your current headcount, it is totally normal not to have tons of documentation, like totally normal. The other thing is that you can also, by having the new hire ramp-up plan of where people should be, you'll know, are they on track or not? And in the article in the new hire ramp-up plans, I have some sample plans for a number of roles. For instance, I could see that in week 1, Kate was doing stuff that was on the month 1 list. Month 1, she was doing stuff for month 2, and I think month 2 or 3, she was doing stuff for month 6.
Nice.
It was clear she was picking things up. In contrast, for a previous person, I could see by the end of the first week, unfortunately, the team member was struggling. And we made some adjustments, but within a month, it was clear that it wasn't going to work, and we parted ways.
And both people are clear because you have that document.
Yes, that the team, the previous team member, not a bad person, just not the right fit for the role. Definitely was not surprised when we had that follow-up conversation.
That's good.
And I'm seeing a few things shared in chat. Let's see. So we have Ian sharing, have a detailed Google Doc outlining everything that needs to be done. Then weekly meetings to ensure things are going well, and eventually move to monthly and then quarterly. Love that part about having that weekly cadence and ideally being able to dial back. If you find that you can't dial back, it may mean they're not picking things up as fast. It's a kind of an early indicator about things. Anne, thank you. You mentioned spreadsheet template, keeping track of, for instance, articles and blog posts to read, things like that, meetings to be had, different team members. Love the idea on meetings. I think, Kate, part of your onboarding was, here are the people to meet in week 1, here are the people in month 1, here, this can wait until month 2 kind of thing. So that way, like, Kate, you didn't have to feel like you had to meet with everyone at once.
Yes, and I definitely think the cadence of our meetings, when I first started, we met weekly. It was an hour plus. And as I got more comfortable with Karl's expectations and the role, now they're weekly 03 meetings, half an hour for us to catch up about things going on.
Yes, definitely, that investment of more time up front will pay off. Or if you realize it's not paying off, then, maybe not. And Anne mentioned video trainings, time estimates, and when to complete. Prioritization is vital. Nancy mentioned straightforward onboarding process, but you have 30 minutes of planned spontaneity, sit downs with the team, each team member for insights into their role, their approach to work, and some personal chat. I love that. I mean, this is a people business. Better people know each other, kind of thing. Just don't do what a client did. One of their managers bought a house or a condo and had all of her direct reports over to paint her house.
Oh,
not do that. No, don't do that.
So terrible.
Yeah, about kind of power different. No, not that. But getting to know people is good. And one more, Michelle, thank you. You mentioned having the formal ramp up. You have a wiki internally, so like an internal intranet. with info about each client and tools and so on. You know, I love the idea of having that documentation somewhere centralized. When I started at the last agency where I was an employee, I was starting as a project manager, then moved to operations. I learned on day one, well, I was supposed to meet with the owner. She decided not to come in that day. My email wasn't working for 2.5 days. Kind of hard to be a project manager without email to get into like all the different tools, things like that. And also I was thrown into a meeting with one of our largest and longest term clients. I wasn't leading the meeting, but I didn't really know anything about the client until like 5 minutes of briefing from our salesperson before the call. And then here's Karl. Yeah, don't do that. And indeed, thinking Michelle, great point about industry publications. You know, I think Stephanie, thinking about the focus on the you know, music and music tourism, you know, what are some trade publications for them to read?
Right.
You might even consider, if you're getting print edition of things, you know, save the back issues and send the new people a couple back issues to be like, get a sense of the vibe of what's going on.
Yeah.
So good luck as you work through things. And Kate, thank you for sharing your perspective.
Of course.
So the final question for today is from Adrienne in Arizona. Something came up, she wasn't able to join live, but I'm going to answer the question anyway. And by the way, if you have a question you'd like to be included and for me to answer live in a future office hours, share that when you RSVP. My colleague Kate will share the links to that in chat. It's every second Tuesday in this time slot via Zoom. So Adrian's question was around client delegation. Specifically about client delegation, should an account manager be the only one to answer client questions? The answer, of course, is it depends. And I would say sometimes yes, sometimes no. If you have a dedicated account manager, the account manager is the owner of the client relationship at your agency. But they don't always have to be the one to answer, as long as the account manager is in the loop on what is happening. For instance, you may have a project manager who might be the backup contact for the client. If the project manager is making a promise to the client, the account manager needs to be aware of it. And ideally, the account manager and the project manager are communicating with each other on a regular basis to make sure they're both in the loop about what's going on the client side, what's going on the internal side, and things like that. So someone other than the account manager could speak with the client, but they need to either check first or be absolutely sure before they say something. For instance, you know, as you think about your client work, you may ideally have some sort of a centralized project management system for organizing client communication, so that when a client request comes in or something comes in, maybe multiple people hear about it. There's a catch though. I discovered this the hard way as director of client services at an agency. A client made a request. One of our team members jumped on it immediately. So before I even responded, he sent me an update and he said, it's done. There was one problem though. The client request was out of scope. I needed to get their buy-in on paying for it. It was a straightforward request. As I've said before, nothing is easy, it's straightforward. Easy sounds like it's free. Straightforward sounds like it's at least $1,000. And unfortunately, he had jumped in and did it before the client agreed to pay for it. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was out of scope. And so I had to go back to him and say, hey, they haven't agreed to pay for it yet. Please roll it back. Let me get their buy-in, and then you can, you know, redeploy it. He wasn't thrilled about this, but you know, if they get it and they see it's done almost immediately, especially when they're not paying for rush turnaround, they're going to expect it every time, and also they're going to be like, well, wait a minute, we have to pay for that. You know, why do we have to pay for it? You just got it done. Sometimes you can choose to make things strategically free, but that needs to be a decision the account manager makes, potentially in conjunction with their boss, rather than people just going rogue and doing things, promising things, and so on. Ultimately, the point is someone needs to be the single source of truth for the account. And if you have a dedicated account manager, the AM usually is the best person to do it. But there still needs to be some oversight. For instance, as a PM at the agency where I discovered right before the call that I'd be on the call and got briefed in 5 minutes before the call, my predecessor had been there for a number of years and apparently got a little sloppy toward the end. For instance, we had an annual update and she quoted an update to a client. Well, I quoted them the update. It was like $10,000 for that particular thing. And the client said, well, last year it was only 5,000. What happened? Why did the price double? Uh-oh. So I did some digging. It turned out that my predecessor had cut the price in half because she wanted to learn to become a developer. And so she decided to do the development portion of the engagement on her own time outside of work hours and gave the client a 50% discount without telling them they were getting a discount. They were getting work that was secretly free, not good, rather than strategically free. Also, she should have cleared that with her boss before just giving out this discount, much less giving it as a secret discount. So someone needs to be in charge of what the ultimate promises are. And the nice thing is that even if the account manager is making the promise, they can have someone else to be the bad guy. They can say, hey, that's a great idea, client. Let me double check with the PM to make sure it fits in the budget and I'll get back to you. That kind of thing, so that they can, blame the project manager. And I don't know, as a project manager, I kind of enjoyed being the person they could blame because, budget, scope, timeline, pick two. So, when it comes to client communications, ideally the account manager is the owner of the client relationship. And so if they're not the only one communicating, they are in the loop about what's happening rather than potentially getting surprised later. Well, that wraps up Sakas & Company's agency office hours for June 2022. I look forward to seeing you again next month. We're here every second Tuesday of the month. You can RSVP for any upcoming date. If you'd like to ask a question, include that when you RSVP. If you don't have a question, please come and listen in listen-only mode and hear what people are talking about, share and chat. Thank you to all of our guests today, and thank you to everyone who shared in chat as well. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Karl Sakas here. Good luck out there.